Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. I'm your host, Frank Acom. I know we had a little time off, so I'm glad that we can play catch up this morning. I understand Friday that the interview may not have played correctly, and I'm not sure. Remember, the day before we had a Clarence Thomas interview. Well, not with Clarence Thomas, but a book about Clarence Thomas. And on Friday it was supposed to play, and I don't believe it did, so I'm going to give it another shot, unless you want to contact me and tell me something different. We have the author of the book, The Politically Incorrect Guide. Let me see if I can put it on camera. The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court by Robert J. Delahunty. So that'll be coming up a little bit later on, but we have a lot to catch up on. First of all, I hope that you did have a wonderful July 4th. There's been a lot. This is a kind of a trend every year where they'll come out with polls, and sometimes there's a narrative behind the poll or a political bias in the media, that people don't care about the country anymore, or there seems to be some of that, but then there seems to be some on the other side. Now, I would love to hear, how did you celebrate July 4th? You can contact me. Are you still proud of the day? Are you still proud of the country? Well, onepoll.us says that 2 out of 3 Americans don't know the true meaning of Independence Day. When asked what July 4th is meant to officially commemorate, only 59% gave the correct answer, quote, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This is a little, I think, a headline grabber, because first of all, 59% got it right. Okay, yeah, we'd like to see that number higher. But 41% got the question wrong, but 22% came close. What do I mean? 22% chose the establishment of the United States as an independent nation. So no, not the correct answer, but not that far off in the scheme of things. So I think, granted, the numbers do speak for themselves. 2 out of 3 Americans don't know the true meaning of Independence Day, but I think a little bit of a clickbait type headline here. Now, 45% correctly answered which year. Most people, I think, if you don't remember your civics classes or you don't remember your history, would say 1776. But the first organized celebration of independence took place 1777, a year after the Declaration of Independence was signed. So I don't know. I thought this was a little misleading, but definitely an attention grabber for July 4th. A couple other things they found in this poll. Only 65% knew that there are 9 members of the Supreme Court, which is interesting because we have that interview coming up a little bit later on. And it's been in the news so frequently. 40% didn't know, this is important, 40% didn't know that the right to bear arms is a part of the Second Amendment rather than the First. So many thought it was the First, which is interesting because you think of how many times they talk about the Second Amendment and how many times they talk about the First Amendment, obviously in 2 different topics. 11% mistakenly believed that freedom of speech was not part of the First Amendment at all. Okay, 11% believe that it's not in there. All interesting numbers. I would take them with a grain of salt, but we do have, when we come back, another article kind of in this vein, which is, again, to try to look at and assess how people are feeling about the country. Very often, as you know, I brought it up on the program a lot in the past, it's doom and gloom the way the media presents it. But then Rasmussen has a poll that shows that people love the July 4th holiday. And so we're going to talk about that, break it down. Of course, we're going to talk about cocaine in the White House, which would actually probably be a pretty good song name. Cocaine in the White House, in the West Wing, as a matter of fact. Originally, we were told the library. Now it was found in the West Wing, is what we're being told. We also have that decision by the judge out of Louisiana to tell the Biden administration you got to lay off social media, not be so heavy-handed with social media and certain censorship there. So that was a big step for the First Amendment, going back to that story. So we're going to talk about as much of it as we possibly can. And as I said, unless you tell me differently, I'm going to have Robert J. Delahunty on This interview was supposed to play Friday, did not play correctly. It's the Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. Again, a different interview than the interview we had on Thursday with the author of the new book about Clarence Thomas. So, a lot here about the Supreme Court, but a lot of other things to discuss, so stay with us. We've got to take our first break. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. And we are back here with Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. If you're out for a walk, right before, if hopefully you're watching this and then you wait, but then wave. We'll add you to the wave counter. And as always, you can contact me at that number on the bottom of the screen. So we were talking about some of the polls and information that come out around Independence Day. Again, it can be a little biased at times. Now, this is an interesting piece from Axios because we've talked about instances of this in the past, which is polls that show that morality, family, and country are down. That's why we talk so often on this program about making sure that we focus on the community, focus on religion, focus on American exceptionalism. And they're looking at it from the guise of the presidential race, how this will affect if there's a lack of patriotism, how does that affect the race? Very often, of course, presidential races heavily steeped in patriotism. But a couple quick things. A majority of Republicans, 60%, still claim extreme national pride, but that has fallen from a near universal 86% 20 years ago. And of course, that was around the wake of 9/11 attacks. The last time, this is interesting, the last time a majority of Democrats said they were extremely proud to be an American was in 2013, months into President Obama's second term. So, you hear that, and then you hear from, who was this from? Rasmussen, we'll take that off the screen. More than half of Americans, 55%, rank the 4th of July as one of the nation's most important holidays, while 6% view it as one of the least important, as Rasmussen reports. So what did you do yesterday? Do you find July 4th an important holiday? The percentage of Americans who highly rank the holiday is up from 53% last year. 36% say the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is somewhere in between. Over the years, Americans have consistently ranked the 4th of July second only to Christmas as the nation's most important holiday. So I think it's interesting. You hear these numbers. Now this is troubling. Only a little over a third of American adults, 34%, believe the founding fathers would consider the United States a success. Now that is up from last year. But if you didn't see this, and it's Fox is reporting on it. We got to take a break. We're going to have our guest coming up in just a little bit. That's Robert Delahunty, the author of Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. But this coming from Fox News, highlighting that, again, this is what I mean by the bias in the media. So the New York Times did a piece where they interviewed people who said they wouldn't celebrate Independence Day because it's controversial, that it's not okay. One of the interviewees said that it's not okay to celebrate the controversial holiday. Use it to celebrate something else. Her name, Malaya Tapp, she posted on TikTok to elaborate her stance. She said, use it to celebrate something else. I will probably go to a barbecue because those tend to be hosted by black family or friends. And I see that as a time to come together and celebrate the fact that we are also still here despite America trying to get rid of us when they were trying to gain their independence. So various panelists on Fox News weighed in on this. Tammy Bruce saying, I think the takeaway here is the message to the left is, one, you need to lighten up. But it does really rely on perpetual victimhood that informs how they view every single thing that's happened in their lives. I thought, and who was it? Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, said it's a perfect example of bias in journalism, and that's what this is. The New York Times went out of their way to find clickbait type headlines to show that people believe that the 4th of July is controversial in some way. Even though poll, like I just mentioned with Rasmussen, majority of Americans say July 4th is among the most important holidays. He said whoever the writer was for the New York Times here basically said, all right, I have a narrative that I want to go with, but I need people who are going to portray, as regular people. And we're going to portray it as indicative of how America is thinking in general on certain topics like July 4th. So, again, just a part of the politicalization of everything where they will try to take July 4th away from you. The New York Times pushing a narrative that it would be controversial by doing man-on-the-street type interviews, but doing so to fit that narrative. We got to take a break, but you can weigh in on all of these topics when we come back. We'll be talking with Robert Delahunty. Again, this was supposed to broadcast on Friday. I was told that it did not properly, so I hope that we're not rebroadcasting it. But either way, it's a very interesting interview with the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. So please stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We are being joined this morning by the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court, Robert Delahunty. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted.
So what makes the book so politically incorrect?
Well, it's no secret. The overwhelming point of view in the media and in law schools is from the left. Mm-hmm. And it's been very critical, harshly and unfairly critical, of the work of the Supreme Court, especially since 3 justices were appointed by President Trump. And what we want to do is right the balance and give a different perspective on the court and its personnel and its work, one that we think will reflect a conservative angle, which is ours, mm-hmm. but which will also appeal to open-minded readers. You don't have to be a lawyer. You can be a non-lawyer of any kind, just with an interest in the court, but someone who wants a balanced and objective perspective, not a partisan perspective on the court's work.
Do you feel that since the hearings for Brett Kavanaugh and his confirmation, do you think that's going to be the standard if a conservative gets on the Supreme Court?
Unfortunately, it has been the standard since at least Robert Bork's nomination in 1987. And most of the time, this kind of controversy centers around a conservative nominee to the Supreme Court. It is extremely unfair. It's destructive of our political institutions. And I hope that it abates. I think it will, but, it's very hard to tell. The Democratic leadership in the Senate, Senator Schumer and his colleagues, have been vituperative in their criticism of the court. He led a rally on the steps of the Supreme Court in which he shouted, look out, Kavanaugh, look out, Gorsuch, we're coming for you.
Right.
So I don't know what to expect from people like that, but I hope it improves.
Well, it's gotten to the point where it's dangerous when you have people visiting the houses of some of these justices. That's a scary situation that they're put in.
Not only visiting their houses, but actually attempting to assassinate them.
Oh, that's right.
And the federal government, Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, despite a law saying that the justices in their homes should be protected, disregarded that and left them, to the mercies of the protesters, and in one case, attempted assassin outside. It's a disgrace.
We're talking about the book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. What do you think currently of the current makeup of the court, and do you believe that's one of the reasons why it has been so vicious with attacks from the media and from politicians?
Absolutely. I mean, since President Trump made the appointees, the balance of power on the court has shifted in a conservative direction. That is, frankly, the first time in about 80 years that the court has had a solid conservative majority. But, let's be clear. Being conservative on the court doesn't mean being politically conservative. They've come down with several decisions recently that have widely been perceived as injurious to the Republican Party. It's not about politics.
Right.
It's about a legal method.
Mm-hmm. I always find it interesting that it seems like when someone that's known as liberal that's on the court, they're pretty much they're going to decide in that way, exactly the way that we expected them to. When it comes to a more conservative judge, that's not always the case.
Well, legal conservatism is kind of a big tent, and I'm very happy with that. It shows a lot of intellectual vigor. Let's take Justice Gorsuch, one of the 3 Trump appointees. He's from the West. He's from Colorado, and he knows about Native America, and he's very sympathetic, unlike some other conservatives or liberals, to the cause of Native Americans. And he's shown that this term by some remarkable opinions in cases involving them.
Why did you and your co-author feel the need to write this now?
Well, because we got the idea about a year ago. It was around the time of the Dobbs decision. And as we all know, there was enormous pushback against the court. There was talk of packing the court to destroy its independence and make it a tool of Biden and the Democratic Party. And we thought we would try to reach out to a broader audience and explain to them why the court's decisions, despite being controversial, were right on the law.
Right.
The court has been trying to separate politics from law, and we think it's basically done a good job.
We're talking the politically incorrect guide to the Supreme Court. And you mentioned the stacking of the court. Do you see that being a trend, that when something doesn't go the way of the left, that'll continue to be brought up?
It will be continued to be brought up, but I think actually what we're seeing now is a different strategy with these ethics charges, most of which are bogus, against the conservative justice. That's not the packing of the court. I don't think that's the objective. The objective is the thinning out of the court to reduce the conservative majority in some cases by claiming that the justices need to recuse themselves from society. It's the sort of opposite strategy.
And it's interesting to see, especially specifically with Clarence Thomas. You figure right from the beginning, as you mentioned, how nasty the confirmations can get when you've got Anita Hill. It seems like he's never been safe in the media's eyes or in politicians' eyes, that they're always going to attack Clarence Thomas, who does have such an amazing background and an amazing story.
Well, I am a big fan of Justice Thomas, and in fact, in my opinion, he's the greatest living American, and a century from now, his greatness will be recognized. But yes, he's been in liberal crosshairs since his confirmation hearings, and in the crosshairs of then Senator Joe Biden. They never let up. They never forgive. They never forget. Justice Thomas is a conservative African-American, man of rock-hard integrity, and they can't bear that.
What you mentioned, one of you think the best American, and also Justice. Who are, when you're doing the research on this book, is there a worse justice, or not maybe politically speaking, but someone that was not qualified for the position?
No, the truth is, in recent decades, everybody who's been picked for the Supreme Court has been hardworking, smart, credentialed, qualified. They deserve all of them. All of them, including liberals, deserve more respect than they generally get.
How much research went into this book? How long did it take you to write?
Well, John Yoo is a professor, a chaired professor of law in the University of California in Berkeley, and he's one of the country's leading constitutional law scholars. So he decades in both our cases. I had a chair at the University of St. Thomas School of Law in Minneapolis before I retired, and now I'm a fellow of the Washington, D.C. branch of the Claremont Institute, and I practice constitutional law on a regular basis and taught it from 1986 to the present. So the answer to your question is decades in the case of
well, I'm glad it can finally come out then. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you think that the court today, and I don't mean the conservative justices picked by the former president, but do you think the court today overall is what the founding fathers intended?
I think it's getting back there. I think long term the project of the justices is to get back to the original meaning of the Constitution. And it's like, when a painting is centuries old and it's been smudged over and varnished over, they're trying to get rid of the grime and the varnish and get back to the original picture, which is pretty beautiful.
In your mind, how important is the court to our country's future? That if we, if we go that direction, if we do correct or right the ship, how important is it for our country's future?
It'll be very healthy for the country. If for one thing, it will empower Congress. A lot of the time, Congress just wants to pass the buck to the executive branch and the administrative agencies, and it tries to duck hard issues, let's say, in occupational safety and health, or an environmental law, and the court is more and more insisting that Congress step up to the plate and take responsibility for policy decisions, one way or the other.
When you see some
That's
of the
good.
Yeah, that is a good thing. When you see the decisions that are coming up, how would you say that your book helps people better understand how maybe a decision's made or what reasoning goes behind it?
Well, I think the key point, it seems to me, with the book is that the court is haltingly, but I think consistently, trying to move in the direction of separating law from politics. I mean, you read these headlines that say, court delivers an opinion on environment. Tomorrow we will have global warming everywhere. That's just totally misleading.
Mm-hmm.
The court, in a case like that, is trying to interpret what Congress did, or else to say this is a decision that is so big it should not be left to the federal agencies alone. It's got to go back to Congress for clarification. It's not saying this is the right way or the wrong way to conduct abortion policy or to conduct student debt relief policy or to conduct environmental policy. It's saying the right decision maker has to make these calls. Sometimes that's Congress, sometimes it's the president, sometimes it is, in fact, the administrative agencies, sometimes it is the court itself when it's a question of violation of constitutional provisions. But mostly it's not trying to make the policy decisions. It's not the right branch. It doesn't have the qualification for that. It's trying to say who the decision maker is, not what the decision shall be.
And you know the subject so well, not just because of the book, but like you said, your background. Does it frustrate you when you see maybe the media's mischaracterization of what the court is doing, or specifically what a specific justice is doing?
Yes, it is. It is very disappointing, and the quality of reporting on legal matters and constitutional matters right now is very low.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing as a conservative, or at least someone with a conservative mindset, you're probably not asked to be an expert on too many of these media outlets.
I got a call once from the New York Times, and I was amazed. And they asked me for my opinion on something, and I said, look, I didn't speak to the New York Times. So it was one of the greatest moments of my life.
A badge of honor. Oh, that's funny. Before we go, and I meant to mention this earlier, and I wanted to kind of pick your mind on it. So we talked about the attacks on the justices. We talked about recently what they're saying about Clarence Thomas and others with ethics charges. What did you think of the leak, and nothing really coming from that leak from the Supreme Court?
First of all, the leak itself is very, very dangerous. I mean, the court depends on confidentiality and trust, and that is one way that the justices, despite their very deep differences, can cooperate and work together.
Right.
And when you have a breach of confidentiality like that, it really damages the functioning of the court. They can get along on a personal level and on a professional level, but not if everybody thinks somebody else's office is prepared to stab them in the back.
Right.
And then not having discovered the source of the leak is very strange and baffling. Justice Alito has said not so long ago that he thinks he knows who is responsible, but he doesn't have the level of proof that would entitle him to identify that source publicly. So there are suspicions, of course, but for whatever reason, that itself is a question, for whatever reason, they haven't been able to either locate the source of the leak or speak publicly about it.
Well, and that's what I think is interesting as someone that doesn't know the ins and outs like you do. Everything that I've seen shows that everything's traceable from the Supreme Court in one way or another. I mean, there's not just rogue agents walking around. So how do we not know the answers, or do you think they're just maybe trying to hope it goes away so it doesn't come up again?
You have to suspect that, but of course we don't have evidence about that. One thing Alito said that people should note, he said, he has been accused of being the source of the leaks, or the conservative justices, with the thought that they would try to freeze frame the draft opinion and force their colleagues to keep signing on. But he said, and he's of course right about that, look, the leak endangered our lives.
Right.
The leak is what led to the assassination attempt. So we're not the ones who did it.
No, and it makes you, I would think, if you're a justice, question all of those, like you said, around you, because if no one can be trusted, right, at this point?
That's right.
Yeah.
Our public institutions operate on the basis of trust of the public in them, trust in people to observe certain norms of collegiality and professionalism. The leak disrupted all of that. It's shameful.
Just before we go, to find out a little bit more about the book, is there somebody that you would recommend that may interest us, a former justice, that we should look up just to pique our interest?
Well, Justice Kennedy is still alive. Former Justice Kennedy, former Justice O'Connor is still alive. I don't know if they are aware of the book, but they're still there. I don't know if they give public interviews. You know?
Yeah. Well,
I
interesting.
think about inviting them.
Well, that would be great. Well, you know what? I think the book sounds.
John Yoo is always available.
Oh, that's right.
We
can go back to back. I like it. We'll piggyback. The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. It sounds wonderful. It's piqued my interest. Where's the best place that we can buy it?
It came out on sale yesterday. It's online at Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, or maybe a bookstore would get it or order it for you, but you can find it online.
Great. Well, best of luck with the book, and thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, thank you to Robert Delahunty for being our guest, the Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. I appreciate the hey. On tomorrow's program, we're going to be talking with Joe Sempolinski, former congressman, current Steuben County chairman of the Republican Party. So we'll be talking with him. I always enjoy when he's on the program. You won't want to miss that. We do have to take a short break because I ran a little bit behind with Mr. Delahunty being a part of the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of our program. But I wanted to highlight a nice email I just received, or a nice text, I should say, about the Cardboard Boat Regatta. Did you happen to catch it? I watched some of it yesterday on Big Fox. I was out of town, but yesterday I got to catch a little bit of it, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed being a part of it with Elisa Trosha. We were both the hosts of it, and if you missed it, you still have an opportunity coming up on the 7th, this Friday at 10:30 p.m. You can watch it right here on Big Fox. On Sunday, the 9th, you can watch it at noon, or a little bit further down the line, Saturday, the 15th at 5 p.m., right before the big LA Dodgers New York Mets game. That's according to my sheet here. So if you watched it, but this is from a nice viewer. They had this to say about the Cardboard Boat Regatta. Great reporting job on the Cardboard Boat Regatta. Very entertaining. Thank you. Well, thank you for reaching out. And as always, I know I say it a lot on the program, but you can contact me. I would love to hear from you. I've been receiving some nice suggestions for potential interviews, some topics we should cover, just thoughts on the show. So always contact me there. And if you have any problems, you say, oh, this interview didn't play right or this didn't happen, please contact me. I'm live on the air, as you know, so I'm hoping that it's all broadcasting. Okay, when we come back, we're going to be talking about cocaine in the White House. That's in just a little bit. And the judge who said to the Biden administration, enough with the contact to social media, pressuring social media to censor certain items. That's what we're going to talk about when we come back. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Marcus Street in Corning. A lot of people out on Marcus Street this morning. I am your host, Frank Acom. Let's talk about cocaine in the White House. There was some miscommunication at first. Originally, it was in the library. We have since been told it wasn't in the library at all, that it was in the West Wing. There's been a lot of reporting on it. Some reporting speculation, could it be Hunter Biden? We know that he struggled with addiction in the past. I'm not reporting that. We won't know probably ever whose it was. I know they're digging deep into finding out who was the source. Hunter got that sweetheart plea deal. And that would hurt that plea deal. So I don't think that even if it were his, that we will ever find out. I could be wrong. I don't like to make predictions, so I'll just say I wonder, and I'll throw the question to you. Do you believe that we will ever know the source? There's the contact information of who the cocaine belonged to. Now, there was the Independence Day celebration yesterday at the White House, and they're saying it was overshadowed by this controversy. They evacuated at some point, had to do the whole, obviously it's an unknown substance. Online trolls, according to the Daily Mail, pointed to Hunter Biden. I don't know. I don't think, who knows? Maybe we'll find out the answer to who it was. I have my doubts. Hunter Biden was among the first family members, again, this is from the Daily Mail, of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for the festivities, just hours after it was confirmed a white powder that sparked a hazmat situation contained traces of illicit drugs. No, I think that's making a story out of it before enough is known. Yes, of course, online trolls are always going to online troll. But who, I don't know. I don't know who it is. Hunter Biden seems like he had the addiction in the past. He said he is working with those struggles. Obviously, he's in the middle of that legal situation. I don't know who it could be. But what do you think? Do you have speculations on who it could be? It was interesting to see how many in the media, not just in conservative media or right-wing media, as they say, did question Hunter Biden on this, or suggested, because of his past addictions, that maybe there'll be a spotlight on him. I would think the opposite of a spotlight on him. But I would love to hear your opinion on what is a very odd story that did really overshadow the news on July 4th. All right, we have to take another short break because I don't want to run too long and start rushing at the end because we still have a lot of stories to get to. But again, you can weigh in on all of it this morning. I'd love to hear from you. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. All right, we are back with Frankly Speaking. We still have a lot to cover. I'm your host, Frank Acom. As always, you can contact me. Suggestions coming in about whether or not we'll actually find the source of that cocaine. I know that some media outlets are trying to not point to him directly, but raising a flag about Hunter Biden, not in any way blaming him necessarily, but saying, well, that is a concern, especially with everything going on with the plea deal, and a lot of people critical of that deal. The Post editorial board put together I think a pretty good review of what's going on, and the headline, we don't have time to get to it. I would recommend that you go to the New York Post's website to find it, but it's called "The Only Thing Getting Clearer in Hunter Biden's Case is the Stench." Yeah. So anyway, tying those two together, but we've already talked about it. I did want to mention a very big story coming out. Again, so many things get buried over holiday weekends. But the judge limiting the Biden administration's contact with social media firms, the judge from Louisiana called it very much Orwellian. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a period perhaps best characterized by widespread doubt and uncertainty, the United States government seems to have assumed a role similar to an Orwellian Ministry of Truth, he wrote in the 155-page opinion piece. Yeah, it is interesting. The judge's theory is, why did it always go, this kind of censorship or this dealing with social media, why did it always go in directions that would seem conservative, that they were trying to censor or bar? The targeted suppression of conservative ideas is a perfect example of viewpoint discrimination of political speech. American citizens have the right to engage in free debate. And how important is that message on July 4th, yesterday? To engage in free debate. And we saw this, and I can't remember if I had an opportunity to get to it, but Don Lemon, yeah, I think I did. Don Lemon was speaking out against his former employer and saying, CNN, and saying, I'm not gonna platform these certain people. And platform is the kind of the hip term for saying, I'm not going to interview or give a microphone. How about that? I'm not going to give a microphone to someone I disagree with. And this happens so often in the media. They use the term, well, I'm not giving them a platform. And that's why you'll see former President Trump, a lot of the rallies not covered like they were in the past, because they'll say we can't give him a platform. So anyway, that's essentially what the judge is saying here. American citizens have the right to engage in free debate about the significant issues affecting the country. The evidence produced thus far depicts an almost dystopian scenario. Now, when we come back, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. weighed in on it. Someone that's been not only censored by social media, also been ostracized by the mainstream media in every article, saying, well, he pushes conspiracy theories, he pushes anti-vax narratives. So he'll be one that you'll see, just tying it in with what I was saying, that he won't be given the platform. We've already seen that essentially by the mainstream media. Occasional article here, an occasional interview here, but really he's had to go rogue, so to speak, to get his campaign out there, because you have people in the Biden administration that obviously have control in the media. The media wants to push Biden across the finish line like they did last go around. So they were told, I'm sure, by certain people in the administration, hey, don't give this Robert F. Kennedy, who's already at 20% in the polls, don't give him, any traction, because we can't have him gaining money, fundraising, and we can't have him really getting his opinion out there where people might start to say, wait a second, this guy makes more sense than a Biden, for instance, or whoever the candidate may be, because he is running, of course, in the Democrat primary. So let me take a break. I know I talked too long. I said I was going to take a break a minute ago, but we're going to talk about what he had to say about that judge's decision when we come back. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. So we're mentioning the judge's decision that the Biden administration limit contact with social media. We know that they often would push for a censorship with things that they disagreed with, sometimes political, sometimes COVID related. So Robert F. Kennedy yesterday saying, federal judge, or I'm going to sneeze. We're going to take our last break. Sorry, folks. I'm going to sneeze here. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. All right, we are back with Frankly Speaking. Sorry about that. A quick break. I didn't want to sneeze live on the air. I didn't think that'd make for the best angle, the best view. All right, so Robert F. Kennedy Jr. celebrated Independence Day with the free speech ruling, saying federal judge orders President Biden to stop censoring his critics, including me. The decision mentions me on page 17. Happy Independence Day, everyone. Yeah, there was a lot of people. I didn't realize how many outlets had been censored in this way. You had, places like One American News, Breitbart, Tucker Carlson, at Fox News, Candace Owens, all of these groups in some way being kind of labeled as problematic, for lack of a better term. So Robert F. And then we learned, just to piggyback off of that, look at this. Pro Kennedy Super PAC says it's raised $10 million. That's pretty impressive. But yes, obviously he's been one that was censored. We have a lot of conservative outlets that were censored at the time, specifically when it came to COVID. I remember the clip where Biden was asked, what would you say to Facebook? Biden saying essentially something like, you are killing people. You are killing people, because, again, we had to have the debate at the time. We should always be having a debate about topics, an open and fair debate. But that was a time when you weren't allowed to disagree with the narrative at all. You're still not. And that's why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is so often in articles said to be a vaccine denier, or they'll always use some type of language to paint him as a loon. And that's why I think some people, his campaign is resonating with them. Now, Gavin Newsom is someone that we talk about a lot, again, on the Democrat side. Gavin Newsom says he is not running, but did you see he was campaigning over the week, at least under the guise of campaigning for Biden in Idaho, still insists he will not enter the 2024 race. He said, "I'm really proud of the president, and I hope you are as well." Biden's poll numbers show that most Americans don't feel the same way as Mr. Newsom does. Then he went, and you want to talk about conspiracy theories. You want to talk about maybe an instance where the media should say, wait a minute, he's pushing this kind of rhetoric and this conspiracy theory. He said, you think Trump, if he gets back into office, is not going to demand a third term? You think January 6th is the last we're going to see? Give me a break. He said, give me a break a couple times. That must be his catchphrase. Again, though, those in the Democrat Party saying he's putting in his work at the beginning, early, not running against Biden, but early, and someday it may pay off. Now, California Republican Party Chairwoman Jessica Malone Patterson said, while Newsom runs a shadow presidential campaign, it's increasingly clear that he wants to take his failures from his own state straight to the White House. You don't want that, Gavin Newsom. You don't want what he's selling. There's something here. He's working on something. Yes, I think he'll run in the future, no matter what. But is it a scenario where he's trying to be the candidate that if Biden says, okay, maybe I'm not going to run, that Newsom could, not just deciding it on his own, but having people put pressure behind him. So Gavin Newsom takes the lead there. I don't know. I find that to be interesting and something the media isn't covering as much as perhaps they should. I mentioned earlier, I know we're going through a lot of things quickly, folks. We missed a lot. And I wanted to make sure we covered as much as we could. Did you see the Biden administration released a State Department review of its botched Afghanistan withdrawal? And botched is a very kind word for what that was. It was a disaster. It was a tragedy. They released it Friday before the 4th of July weekend. And obviously, any Friday drop is meant to bury the release, but especially when you have a long weekend coming up. By the way, about 60 pages were omitted, censored. That's a typical thing that they could do as well. Who was it? A Waltz House Armed Services Readiness Subcommittee Chairman Mike Waltz said, shameful. The Biden administration would release a damning report on Afghanistan the Friday afternoon of a holiday weekend. Typical D.C. swamp tactic. Like other Afghanistan-related documents, much of this report remains unnecessarily classified to avoid future embarrassment, transparency, and accountability. Now, if you're not familiar with Waltz, he was a Green Beret Army National Guard colonel who served in Afghanistan. We are out of time. There is a piece, if you get a chance, go to New York Post about Bridezilla. Someone wrote into Dear Amy or one of those and said, I didn't invite my conservative uncle because I was fearful of him. Because I can't hear any difference of opinion. This goes back to the stories we had at the beginning of the program. But now he won't send me a wedding gift. It's actually really hilarious. Dear Amy, Ask Amy, pardon me, really doesn't hold back. Let's recap. Your delicate daughter is too frightened to hear a conservative voter to allow her Uncle Dave to attend her wedding. She then asked you to do her dirty work for her, and of course you do, meaning the mom calls the uncle. But it's the second problem that she has the most issue with. Brides who are too afraid of family members to invite them to a family wedding don't then get the pleasure of receiving the money. You can find the whole piece at the New York Post. But we are out of time. Thank you to everybody who joined us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with Joe Sempolinski right here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox. I look forward to it.